Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. The BSE benchmark Sensex rallied over 300 points on Monday to end at over a 6-week high of 35,775 as investors widened their portfolios ahead of the RBI's board meet outcome amid foreign fund inflows. Also, positive cues from other Asian markets and a firm opening in the European shares buoyed investor sentiment in India. A crucial meet of the Reserve Bank's Central Board was held on Monday amid a rift between the central bank and the government over the future course of policies. The Finance Ministry nominees and some independent directors were expected to take on RBI Governor Urjit Patel and his team over issues ranging from MSME credit to the central bank's reserves, though both sides are in favour of reaching a common ground. Expectations of a positive outcome boosted market mood after the meeting began. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyse the issues of contention between the RBI and the government and the best way forward. Joining me on the programme today are Ajay Dua, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, and A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Bhattacharya, I'd like to begin the program with you. First, let's try and put into perspective what are the main contentious issues between the government and the RBI?
Well, there are broadly, three areas that have come into focus. Number one, which is the most contentious issue in my view, is the government's plea that the capital framework law should be reviewed. In other words, what should be the surplus that the RBI should part with its chief shareholder, which is the Government of India. And that is something which is a point of contention. Number two is the government desires that the RBI should look at the prompt corrective action plan that has been put in place for at least 11 public sector banks because their lending record has not been able to inspire confidence in the minds of the regulator. So that is so the government wants that why not relax those prompt corrective action norms for some of those banks at least, so that they can get into the business of lending once again, and the government's capitalization plan can also bear more fruit. And number three is on the question of the medium and small enterprises sector, the financing issue. Linked to that is the liquidity challenge right now in the system. RBI has responded to the liquidity issue to some extent by saying that we are going in for the open market operations with fair regularity.
Right.
But on the MSME, I think the MSME lending window has not yet been agreed to, but these are the three broad issues that are a bone of contention between the RBI and the central bank. There are many other small issues like the hedging of commercial borrowing, the swap arrangement needs to be properly looked into. But I think if these three broad issues that I mentioned can be resolved, I would say the relationship that have definitely got strained will probably see better days.
Absolutely. Mr. Dua, what is it that needs to be addressed at the earliest, do you believe? Mr. Bhattacharya very beautifully brought out several of those broader aspects, but what needs to be addressed first?
First, just let me add one other issue of discord. It seems a fourth one, in addition to the three which were mentioned, is greater liquidity for NBFCs. Is also an issue of concern with the RBI, and at this point of time, RBI would like to, the government would like to see much greater liquidity in the market and liquidity to NBFCs, which post the ILFS event seems to be getting checked, is also an issue they would like to address. I think what the government would like to see a resolution to, and in fitness of things, I think RBI also should go. It is, first I would say, a spirit of accommodation is today's meeting is absolutely must. There have been differences between the government and the RBI even in the past. Some of those go back to the time when Mr. R.K. Malhotra used to be the governor, then we've seen it during the term of Dr. V.Y. Reddy, then in terms of then Dr. Subbarao, who was there. But most of these things have got, they did not require a hawkish approach from either side of saying we are now in public interest invoking the section 7, which says hold consultations, thereafter issue a direction to the RBI board or to the RBI in terms of calling it a public interest. First is the spirit which has to, from both sides, one saying how do we find a solution to these issues, and I think all of them can be found are capable of resolution, except probably the very first one which was raised, that is the capital framework. Capital framework is something which has been discussed over time. This was raised in 2013-14 also, and of all the people it was settled with Dr. Raghuram Rajan. They said, I will transfer the entire annual profit, not the past. Whatever profit comes, the Reserve Bank, after their incurring expenditure and are making provisions, and that is what the law also requires, after profits should be transferred. Since then it is getting moved to the government. So I would think that apart from this issue which could kind of make things a little hot, others are all capable of resolution and they could be resolved even in today's board meeting.
All right. Mr. Desai, I'm going to further the point that Mr. Dua made. The fact that both sides are in favor of reaching common ground, especially after what we've seen over the last few weeks. Now, that is a positive sign, isn't it?
Yes, it is a positive sign. And I used to sit in that finance ministry as chief economic advisor, and he referred to the little tussle between R.K. Malhotra and Venkat Narayan. I was a chief economic advisor then. And let me tell you one thing. Every chief economic advisor has casted very covetous glances at Reserve Bank surplus for two reasons. One, it is very large and secure. And two, the argument was always that this profit arises because the Reserve Bank gains the seigniorage right. The seigniorage is I issue cash and against that the government issues bonds. So it's a lot of its interest income is basically against these. And this is basically seigniorage, which is the sovereign right. The king can always stamp money, and issue it. That profit should come to the government. And I can tell you as chief economic advisors we've got. Now that has happened. Now, under particularly over the past few years, the entire surplus of the RBI as defined, if you look at the RBI accounts which were just issued some time back, everything except some absolutely derisory amount has been transferred to the government. This has happened. In my days, it wasn't true. That is why we were so covetous. It didn't happen. So that's why we wanted them to pass it all on to us. And they wanted to retain the right to decide how much to put in IDBI, how much to put in NABARD, etc. But this has already happened. What has not happened is passed. And actually, my understanding is that under the RBI Act, they cannot transfer the past surplus. Once that has been put into the reserves, it cannot be transferred. Full stop. Any change in the economic reserve requirement can only apply in future.
Right.
It cannot apply to the past. So I think this business of the government wanting 1 lakh crores or 2 lakh crores or 3 lakh crores is nonsense. It is not permissible under Section 47 of the RBI Act. You can only transfer the surplus. What you can question is how that surplus is calculated. And government is focusing, oh, you've got excess reserves, much more than 12% that you require. The thing is, out of the 10 lakh crores of reserves, 7 lakh crores is just notional. It is unrealized capital gains on the holdings of foreign assets, plus any gains they may have made because of interest rate fluctuations on the bond holdings. Now, this is not realized capital gain. It's a book entry. It could easily well go the other way around. Even if suppose you say, oh, no, the rupee is not going to suddenly get upvalued that much. But the fact is, what I need in order to intervene in exchange market is dollars.
Right.
You know, that the revaluation in the books does not mean, oh, suddenly I can transfer it. It will actually reduce my capacity to intervene in the market if I were to transfer that. So let's be realistic. What we are talking of is about 3 lakh crores. 3 lakh crores for an economy our size, for the size of the balance sheet of the RBI. RBI's balance sheet is about 30% of GDP.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, 3 lakh crores is nothing compared to that. So I would say that it is extremely risky to start questioning this. And today I've seen statements by foreign bondholders who said they would be seriously concerned if this were to happen.
Right.
This will be because Reserve Bank must retain a AAA rating.
Absolutely.
And for that it requires reserves. So I hope they don't do anything foolish. Now, if they decide to set up a committee to look into it, okay, we can live with that. Like all government committees, it will be at its work for the next 3-4 years. And by then, hopefully, things will calm down.
Okay.
But that's one thing. On the other side, I think there should be a spirit of accommodation. There is a problem on NBFCs. I've argued on your program itself that maybe sooner or later they'll be forced to do something because there's a systemic risk involved there.
Right.
There are problems on the MSME side. On the PCA side, it's slightly different.
We'll come to the PCA side in just a bit. I'd like to hear all of yours view on the PCA side as well. But yes, Mr. Dua, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. Just continuing the point which Mr. Nitin Desai was making, the currency and gold revaluation reserve out of this 9.87 lakh crores is a whopping 6.91 crores, which is a notional one, the point which is being made. So the rest which is left, including, and the next entry is contingency fund reserve, which is 2.31 crores, and all others are under a lakh of crores, 33,000 to 31,065 or 6,500, which just add up to 3 lakh crores, which is said. That is also contingency fund has also been built over the years. 74 years the Reserve Bank has been there since 1935. It's not been done overnight. The fact of the matter is that the 6,500 crores which they have as a capital reserve is almost equal to the yearly profit which they are making. That is something which can go to the government.
Yeah, Mr. Bhattacharya wants to add something.
I just wanted to add to this that I think the question about the capital framework norms, what the government has asked the RBI under Section 7 is not seeking any amount. I think there has been a wrong reporting in the media. No amount has been sought from RBI, as has been reported as 3.6 trillion rupees has been asked for. That is not true. What the letter, which I was privy to, says is that they just want a capital framework norms to be reviewed. Now, as Mr. Desai rightly pointed out, the best thing would be in today's meeting is to refer it to a technical committee of sorts, which can look into this and realize that what is needed and what is not needed. It should not be decided at a RBI board meeting where some independent members would say, no, give this much the money. Why? It is an expert matter. Let it be decided by technical committee. Okay. And that's the way it should be sorted out.
Okay. So an issue like this should be left to the experts is what you're suggesting.
Absolutely.
All right. Yes, Mr.
Dua. The fact of the matter, take their own sweet time.
The fact of the matter is we are again coming to a situation or to the issue that RBI board and the RBI governor have concurrent powers under the law. The RBI board cannot, and I'm saying it very strongly, give a direction to the RBI governor or in his absence to the deputy governors who can exercise his powers without going through a process of regulation making, which requires approval of the parliament, because that process has been laid down.
Yes.
The issue of capital framework is not a new one which is being visited upon. The question is basically how much of profit and how do you calculate the profit is the issue which can probably be referred. But if you are saying that a technical committee can look at the reserves which have been built over the years and which are notional by and large, I think that there could be resistance in the or to even setting up such a technical committee by the RBI in today's board.
Right.
One
Yes.
quick addition. You know, around when Raghu took over, which was what
2013.
Yeah, 2013. Maligan, the big man, the man who really knows all this better than anyone of us, advised that you don't need more reserves.
That's right.
And in the 3 years that Raghuram Rajan was there, all the money was given.
Full amount.
Right.
You know, all the money was given.
Right.
So it's not as if the RBI is trying to deny resources to the government. At that time, the judgment was, no, we don't need to add to our reserves.
Right.
So they gave it.
The only thing, Nitin,
But
is
small amounts.
saying 100 crores more should have come, 200. Calculation of profit.
Okay,
That's all.
Okay, very quick reaction on the adequacy of RBI reserves, Mr. Bhattacharya, and then we move on to other issues. You know, what is the right level of reserves at the end of the day?
Well, you know, I'm not an expert in that sense. I would rather like it to be reviewed afresh because when the government of India is writing to RBI Governor under Section 7 that it needs to consult him on what should be the right amount of money that needs to be transferred or what should be the reserve level, then I think it is only under the, because it is under the law. So therefore, the right decision would be to get it examined. And if large portions of these reserves are notional, then surely the technical committee should look into it and find out that the notional amount should not be calculated while you are actually estimating what should be the amount that can be considered to be shareable.
I know both of them want to comment on the debate very quickly because we need to move to other aspects as well.
I understand that, but basically what he is saying, the issue of has been studied earlier also by Maligram Committee, etc., and other people. They remember this. You must recognize we are a current account deficit country. The contingency requirements that you may have in a current account deficit country may be very different from some other countries. So don't overdo. Some people say, oh, it's much more than the 12% which Japan holds.
Those things
That's
are
not
correct.
Right.
That's not correct.
It has been probably these reserves form about 26% of the RBI's assets.
Yes.
This 9.6 lakh rupees. Yeah. And what's been, certain banks, central banks have been studied and they said their average was 14. So this is far too much. But the banks which have been studied, the central banks, not many of them are from large emerging markets like India, which face issues of foreign exchange fluctuation, inflation per se, deficit financing, and whole lot of capital, capital coming in and out.
Right.
The issue is, even why invoke when you've never done it, why invoke a direction to the RBI? Everybody suspects that consultation, Section 7, is a precursor to the government moving on to the other section, Section 84 or something, which allows the RBI government then to give it a direction.
Right.
The autonomy of the Reserve Bank needs to be preserved, not only in act, but also the way the perceptions are made. Otherwise, the question is, all that we talk about is more foreign exchange coming to the country, more FDI coming, more FPI. People would start thinking that here is the government which is also running the economy in India, and there could be, and it's not financial stability and those inflation control and those kind of things are also taken over by an agency which actually spends the money, rather than the one which ensures that there is a regulatory framework in
Absolutely.
position.
I think we spent quite a bit of time on the reserves. Let's move on to several other aspects. There are many of them to be discussed. Of course, we won't touch upon the NBFCs because we've had a separate discussion on that very subject. But let's talk about small businesses, MSMEs. Mr. Bhattacharya, the government has been seeking for more loans, really more liquidity as far as small businesses and MSMEs are concerned. Why has the RBI been reluctant really to lend a helping hand?
I think RBI's concerns need to be understood from where they are coming from. They are worried that mudra loans have already raised some questions about the manner in which those loans have been granted and what kind of collateral damage it might cause to the financial system. So similarly, the RBI is worried. But in my view, but the government, which is the elected government, also has its concerns that after demonetization and GST, the MSME sector has gone through tremendous stress in terms of credit availability, and his own business prospects have been undermined to a great extent. So therefore, government is also justified in seeking a special window, for the MSME sector. So I think this is a point where the government and the RBI can come together and see common ground. So I don't think this is an intractable issue, and I also understand that RBI is not intractably opposed to the idea. It is just that the manner in which it needs to be given, the prudential norms should not be violated, and if a lending window is created, it should not lead to lending indiscipline. The credit discipline is an idea that should never be undermined. The problem would be when you tinker with the prompt corrective action plan. So that would be a dangerous thing.
I'm just going to come to that.
The MSME window, to my mind, is a legitimate demand, but demand should be met after making sure that the credit discipline of the banking system is not compromised.
Absolutely.
That is resolvable.
Absolutely. Yes, Mr.
Let me
Desai.
touch on PCA now, you see,
Yeah.
because it's connected.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why the government wants election of the PCA, several of the PCA banks have been involved in MSME funding, and many of the complaints that have been received are about the inability to get money from them because they are under PCA. Now, the real problem of PCA is that all government banks, and the real problem of PCA is they are capital inadequate. Who should be responsible for that capital? The owner. And who is the owner? The government. Now, the government can't substitute its responsibility for enhancing the capital of these banks so that they come out of PCA framework and then pass it on as some special window in the RBI for this, because RBI is not going to lend directly. What could happen is maybe just a window for refinancing what the banks should do. So in the case of PCAs, I think the RBI is right to lean on the government and say, they are your banks. You better capitalize them adequately. It is possible that 2 or 3 of these are well on the road to recovery. And there may be some compromise by which they will be taken out of PCA on an undertaking by the government. They will capitalize it a little bit more, etc. But I don't think the capital adequacy dimension, which is what underlies the PCA, should be seriously challenged. It is very risky in the state in which our financial system is.
Mr. Dua, what do we do with these banks? I mean, do we privatize them? Do we shut them down? Really, what's the way forward?
Larger question. But as of now, there are not going to be too many takers for these banks, particularly the 11 banks under the PCA. Everybody talks about saying credit growth has been picking up by the banking sector. There's a road to recovery, etc. As if very soon they can be privatized or, because we can dilute their holding. Fact of the matter is, if you look at a little more granular, a lot of the lending by these PCA banks, apart from being to the MSMEs, has also been to real estate sector. And I have a fear that very soon the incomplete projects of real estate, which have been funded by them and now under prompt corrective action, the further lending disbursements to them has been stopped. That could hit their NPAs much more, meaning their bottom line much more than it has. And we already know for the July-September quarter compared to the quarter last year, the losses of these 11 banks are 3 times what they were last year. All right, partly because of higher provision for NPAs, but on the whole, they continue to be in dire straits. So the question of diluting the capital adequacy norms, and all in the name of saying credit growth should be more in the economy, we could be heading then towards greater trouble, and something which will hit these banks, the banks' own real valuation if they go to the market to raise money, or to the government tries to sell them off. So I would think that rather than go ahead and again capitalize them, or not capitalize, ask the Reserve Bank to open a special window, allow them to lend, could be actually much more problematic going forward.
True. I've got 5 minutes left on the program, so let's try and get in something on the board as well, because that's something that we've not spoken about. Mr. Bhattacharya, what should the role of the board be really? Because it's been reconstituted, a few people have been brought in from here, from there. What should the role of the board be going forward?
Well, you know, I think board is an advisory board, and there are government nominees, there are private sector nominees, there are, you know, people like the Tata Group chairman is a member, you have Dilip Shangvi, he is a member. You also have the government's, you know, the party affiliates, some nominees are also there. And it is an advisory board. That board is an advisory board, and it can advise, but the real action, the decision should be left to the RBI management. Now the board can come in and discuss issues, get the inputs, and then it should be left to the RBI management, which is the 4 deputy governors and the governor. They should take the decision. So the line is very clear in my view. And just one point I want to make about the PCA thing. Mr. Desai mentioned about the PCA and the capitalization. I think, you know, the government as well as the RBI probably, we are barking up the wrong tree, because I think instead of seeking a relaxation in PCA, RBI as well as the government should make sure that the recapitalization process should be linked to performance of the banks.
Yes.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Don't make it an open-ended recapitalization for every bank in the same quota, same share. Right. That would be bad. And something that has not been discussed in the PCA framework is that the amount of attention that is needed to beef up the management of these public sector banks,
right.
I don't think we have paid that much attention.
Right.
So what has happened to the banks boards bureau, that work that seems to have, you know, where was the private sector talent supposed to come? Where are the bankers who would be inducted into these public sector banks? If their lending is a problem, then get people
right.
who can do better.
We need a multi-pronged approach is what you're suggesting, and everything needs to be addressed, you know, holistically. You know, Mr. Desai, talking about the board itself, you know, Mr. Bhattacharya is of the opinion that the decision should be left up to the management and not the board. Would you concur, or do you believe that the board should play a bigger role?
No, I don't think the board should play a bigger role. What I would say is what we need is public accountability for the actions of the RBI. In the case of the monetary policy side, the monetary policy committee thing clearly lays down a criterion, which is the inflation figure. It must be 4% plus minus 2, you see. That's a clearly identified. And it actually says that if it departs, the Reserve Bank must give an explanation in writing to
Parliament.
To Parliament.
Yes.
I would say for the other part of the Reserve Bank, I would put the criteria in terms of financial stability. That is what I should look for. That is its job. And I would look for a criterion of financial stability, spell it out more clearly, more explicitly,
right.
and say that you will be publicly accountable for this.
Sure.
That is what matters, not to some 18 people who are more like a stakeholder advisory group
right.
than something which necessarily represents a country.
Right. Closing comment from you, Mr. Dua.
Technically, it's not an advisory group, the board. Technically, it is a board of the bank which has powers of supervision, superintendence, etc. But that power, exercising the mode of it, is also prescribed through regulations, parliamentary approval, etc. But the fact of the matter is that power is also concurrent, given to the Reserve Bank governor and his deputies. And over a convention has been all these 74 years, since 1934 that this act has been there, that by convention the board has let the 4 full-time governors, the deputy governor and the governor, to run it. But the accountability to the board, I think, is the first place where we need to look at. They may have allowed it to run, but the law or the regulations of accountability to the
right.
board in the first position, though appointment of the governor is not by the board, it's not like the corporate structure board, it is by the government. And then a board's report
right.
of accountability being laid to the parliament, etc., is necessary. So internal checks first,
right.
internal accountability, then external to the parliament or the parliamentary committees.
Sure. All right then. On that note, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.